even in the early 20th century, there was still so much animosity between the Saxon Lutherans and the Prussian officers because, the Saxons and the Prussians still had a lot of bad blood against each other. And so they would actually keep Saxon soldiers away from each other and their infantry units for that reason.
Welcome to City Square Podcast, where we talk to everyday people about faith and work. My name is Micah. My guest this episode is Clay Goupil from the great state of Florida. He is a school teacher at a Lutheran school. He's a meme page admin, which is how we met, and an aspiring seminarian. So thanks for joining, Clay.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So we are going to start things off. I don't know if you've seen a few of these recent ones. We're going to start things off with some questions from the Would You Rather cringe game. This is Would You Rather. This is a high church cringe edition. So we won't go through. I've done a few of these with some Anglican and Lutheran and apparently quite cringeworthy. So we'll see how it goes. So would you rather take communion from Father James Martin or Nadia Bowles-Weber?
Oh. Well, I'll say this. I guess James Martin does at least have valid holy orders. I'll go with James Martin.
Right. Would you rather listen to a sermon with no law or no gospel?
I guess I would say no law. I'll default to that. Luther, one of his more famous quotes is that, he preaches the gospel every Sunday because every Sunday the people in the congregation forget it, and I would assume I'm among those people who might forget it more easily. I don't need to remind myself of the law. It's there already, so I think I would rather go without the law. I don't know if that would be the case for everybody necessarily, but I think for me, that probably would be so.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty split so far with law versus gospel. Some people think that just with our kind of Epicurean culture now that we need the law.
Mm-hmm. No,
but
that's fair too.
Yeah, it does depend, I think, on the person. Okay, sweet. Would you rather have Tullian Tchividjian teach on marriage or have Mark Driscoll teach on healthy leadership?
I feel like the Mark Driscoll one would be just a little bit more funny, just, recent events regarding his return to ministry. I think that would be just interesting to see. If I have to look at two dumpster fires, which one will be, a more fun fire to look at. So I think I'm going to look at the Driscoll one.
Man, I really appreciated Driscoll back in the day. Mm-hmm. He's one of the reasons I left being a Baptist or a fundamental Baptist.
Right.
But I don't know. I thought that was tough. All right, and then last one. We're not doing the full one. We're just doing an abbreviated version. I think people can only take so much cringe. Would you rather have high liturgy with no communion or contemporary service with communion?
Ooh, I think that's probably the toughest one yet. I mean, I don't want to go too deep in the hypothetical here. Is this no communion forever or just at one particular service?
Let's say for a long time, that you're stuck at a church that does one or the other.
Man, I'm going to go ahead and say the contemporary one, and I'll just maybe dip out, go to the bathroom while the music's playing, come back maybe for the sermon. I find ways around it. I don't know if that's cheating, but that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, I feel you. No communion, man. It's rough.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, thank you. That's just to loosen you up since you weren't loose before already.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your background then. Where did you grow up, your testimony? Walk me through that.
All right. So I actually grew up right here in Lake Mary, Florida. I was actually baptized in the ELCA. My parents were kind of nominal Lutherans who, they didn't really know the difference between LCMS or ELCA or any of that. And we very briefly went to the church that I actually now teach at. And I actually, I was so young, I barely even remember my time there. And so really most of my childhood that I remember anyway was actually spent in a non-denominational church here in Central Florida. And as far as non-denominational churches go, I would actually call it kind of reasonable. They didn't get too hyped up on the, revivalism or any of that. It was pretty straightforward. The pastor was a pretty reasonable guy. The youth pastors, if, we're using that terminology, they were also somewhat reasonable. I actually grew up kind of liking, my non-denominational background, but I think if you want to look at my, and I'll try and keep this part brief, but if you want to look at my kind of how I got to where I am, I think it would start at those summer camps. Every summer you have those camps that the non-denominational churches tend to go to. And I
Mm,
remember the very first one I went to right before I went into sixth grade. They had their kind of revival night. Everyone was crying. We're all pledging our lives to Jesus again. I remember being, it's probably very stock what you see with a lot of converts across the high church traditions. And I remember myself being like, oh
yeah.
my gosh, I'm going to change my life. And we get back, and for the first week we're totally different people, and we get back 2 weeks later, and it's like we never went anywhere. And
Yeah.
year after year after year, that was kind of the experience. And by the time I was like before my last two summer camps, before my junior and senior years of high school, I'd be the person in the room that wasn't crying, and I almost felt awkward. I wasn't criticized or looked down upon for it, or these were good people at the end of the day. But I certainly felt out of place, because it's like, hey, I mean, why am I the only person who's not feeling the emotions here? Because I mean, I knew it was because we're going to get back and it's going to go back to normal. And I was starting to kind of
Yeah.
see, without really realizing things, what the issue was. It's like, we're depending on ourselves for these changes when it's not of ourselves. And so I went to Liberty University in Virginia. If you're not familiar,
Mhm.
it's the big kind of, they're going to call themselves non-denominational, but it's in line with that general American kind of Baptist, maybe charismatic kind of line of Christian tradition. And that's where I really started to actually have problems with my non-denominational background, because I'd be going to churches, and every last one I went to, and Liberty is, as far as the American evangelical spectrum goes, kind of broad. I mean, you've got everything from like James Wright, Paul Washer, fundamental like Reformed Baptist, all the way to your borderline Montanist and the Bethel movement and things like that, and everything in between. And whichever churches I'd go to, primarily the charismatic ones, because by this point in Liberty's history, they've kind of shifted from that traditional Baptist kind of culture to a more charismatic, emotional. I'm sure I'm not the only person who would agree with that. But so most of the churches I went to were very along those lines. I know one Easter I was dragged to go to an Easter service, and I wasn't going to church at all at this time, so I wasn't even interested in going on Easter even. And it was an Assemblies of God church in Lynchburg, and it was
Mm.
just cracked out of its mind. I mean, there was one point where the pastor was like jumping on the pulpit, pretending to crack a whip at the no, sorry, he was cracking a whip at the congregation. He was actually cracking a whip at us. He's like, "Look what Jesus went through for you." And then the service culminated with this guy dressed up as Jesus, kind of standing and holding his hands up in the air. It was very bizarre, and I think that's kind of the moment in time where I'm like starting to wonder, like, is this really what the apostles would want? And so to kind of keep it brief, and get
Mm.
on to the next thing. There's this church I would drive by on the way home, my 2 years where I was off campus, my two later years. And it was a Methodist church, and it was really pretty. I mean, stone construction, the architecture of the building looked serious. I could see stained glass. You could tell it was a historic building. Not that a church needs to be historic to be good, but you get the idea that the art and the architecture mattered. And I never really considered going, because I knew the Methodist denomination had a kind of liberal reputation. But I always thought to myself, like, if the churches I'm used to going to made an attempt to look like this, then I'd be much more likely to go. And so,
Mm.
long story short, I'm still in Virginia after I graduate college for some Army training at Fort Lee. I'm an officer in the Army Reserve, so I was at Bullock for about 4 months. But I actually went back to Lynchburg every weekend just because it was so close by. And I kind of resolved one weekend driving past that church, saying, when I get out of Fort Lee and I'm done with Bullock, I'm going to try and make an attempt to go to church again somewhere. And so what happens is, I go to Rome on a trip with a former college buddy of mine, and I see my first high church mass, and I'm like this is it. Like, I'm going to become a Catholic. And of course I don't become a Catholic. I came back from that trip wanting to give everybody a fair shot, and it kind of came down to the Catholics versus the Lutherans. I never really gave the Orthodox a close look, just because to me I was like, oh well, you got to be Greek to be Orthodox. I was obviously much newer, in studying these things, I didn't realize that, it's obviously not a cultural thing that you have to be Greek to be Orthodox. I know that now, of course, but back then I didn't know that. And so I was looking at Lutheran theology, and it was kind of resonating more with me. Essentially, my thoughts going into it were, if St. Paul were to come back today and he were to write a letter to each denomination, who would need the shortest, least angry letter? Like that was basically my MO going into figuring out where I'm going to land in all this, this broad array of different Christian denominations. And my eventual solution after kind of months of looking into this was that I thought that the confessional conservative Lutherans had it, and eventually that is the call I end up making.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Which denomination would he write the shortest, least angry letter to?
Yeah,
I like that. That's good. That's a good rubric. So you've been, how many years have you been Lutheran then?
So I started attending a Lutheran church. That would have been the fall, I think, October, September of 2019.
Okay.
I had made the decision for sure later that same year, when I had visited Scandinavia. I knew by that point that the state churches of Scandinavia were basically all apostate, but I knew of their Lutheran history, and I saw what would have at one point been a Lutheran mass in Denmark, and I thought, okay, well, these Lutherans, or at least loosely Lutherans, they have the liturgy that appeals to me that the Catholics, Orthodox have, but their theology seems to be more scriptural to me. So that's where I really took the first step. I came home. I started going to an LCMS church in Clearwater, Florida, and I was confirmed, sometime later in that fall or early in the winter, whatever it was. I forget exactly. I think November of that year. And so I've been attending and been a part of the Lutheran Church since that time in 2019. So a little under 4 years.
Gotcha. Okay, that's kind of similar to my time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like late 2019 or maybe a little earlier when I started exploring Lutheranism.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the converts I know across the different high church traditions, like something happened in 2018 to bring us all to Rome or Wittenberg or wherever we all ended up. It does seem like a lot of people I know, specifically just through my internet connections, they all either converted or reverted in some cases in the late 2010s. I don't know what was in the water that year, but something.
Yeah, for me it was a Lutheran coworker who we were the only like really serious Christians on the team, because I was in like a non-denominational church, and he messaged. We were just talking over IM, and he basically asked me, "Well, what does your church teach about baptism?" So, and then it was off to the races, because I was like, "Well, nothing from Scripture."
Yeah.
I had to anyways, that was a fun journey. That was a long time of me kind of being unwilling. Eventually, I was like, okay, I see where you're getting baptismal regeneration. I see where you're getting that. I disagree. Mm-hmm. I was there for a little while, and then moved on to eventually, okay, no, that's actually what the Scripture teaches. So,
yeah, the sacramentology was a little weird to me. The baptism thing made sense, because when I come back from Rome, I immediately, because I associated Catholics with baptizing infants, and so that much started to make sense to me quite quickly. But I had never in my life, as a pretty active churchgoer, at least up until mid-college, taken communion ever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there was one time I visited a roommate's Baptist church. He was from a town nearby the school. He was from a Baptist family where the dad was an elder at a Baptist church. And I'd taken communion there as a freshman in college. And that was the only time I'd ever taken communion ever.
Wow.
Even as, active as I was back home. And so when I first started attending a Lutheran church, I met with the pastor the week after my first visit there, and he kind of went through the basics of the catechism, and he talked about how Lutherans believe that, this is Christ's body and blood and the bread and wine. I'm like, what? Because, like communion just was never on my mind. Like it was not something that registered as being important, because it hadn't been in my upbringing in the non-denominational background. They didn't take it. They took it quarterly, once, 4 times a year, and it was not on Sundays.
Wow. Was that to like fence the tables, perhaps?
Well, to be truthful, I don't know, because, as a younger person, I wasn't we weren't encouraged to go until you were much older. I want to guess the reason they would do it on a Wednesday was to make it more serious, because if you're only going to do it 4 times a year, and as I've said, this church I grew up in was pretty reasonable as far as non-denominationals go. And
Yeah.
my good faith guess is that the reason they did it on Wednesdays and not on a Sunday was so that people who were coming to take it were going out of their way to take it, even if they had, their erroneous idea of what communion is. They were still, perhaps, again, this is a guess,
Yeah.
safeguarding and making sure people understand that it is serious, even under their idea of what communion is.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good guess. I've heard of people doing it quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might have been the cadence, because my dad's a Baptist pastor to this day, and I think that might be the cadence they follow for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Is every, or maybe monthly. It might be monthly. I'm not sure. And it's always on Sunday evenings, which is the more sold out for Jesus crowd.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
the ones who are a little more serious, you're not going to get as many visitors and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think at least for my dad, so like he's Zwinglian, that most Baptists are in their theology of communion, but there was still a lot of reverence, and it was kind of a very solemn occasion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved from, independent fundamental Baptist to a big non-denominational church, and the attitude is much more casual around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like they get like 3 minutes to do it. They have it's super quick to, be passed out, and,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, there's ushers at every row, like passing the things down. It's interesting, the different traditions.
Yeah, a friend of mine goes to one of those kind of big box mega churches, and they actually, this is probably the worst practice of it I've seen, where they'll have and the seats ahead of them. You know how a lot of those seats will have little pouches behind the back, and they'll actually put the communion in there, and it's grape juice and a sealed little package wrap of a cracker or whatever, and grape juice, and like they don't even usher it out. They just like, all right, everyone, take it out of your seats. Like, yikes.
Snack time.
But most non-denominationals, like the ones I grew up in, they do take it more serious than that. This is kind of your big box, like wannabe elevation kind of churches that I've only seen that kind of abuse in.
Yeah, I timed it. Well, I thought about it after the fact and got an estimated time. I think it was about 15 to 20 minutes it took for my church to do it on like a normal Sunday, and even that's, I think, fairly quick.
You mean your current church?
Yeah, my current church.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Lutheran LCMS. Yeah.
Right.
So, because I had a conversation with a friend, and then I was curious about how long because he's like, oh yeah, it only takes 3 minutes. I was like, I'm like, I wonder how long we take from the beginning of, the liturgy, or, the words of institution, the explanation of the sacrament, and then all through it. About 15 minutes. I know there's some places you probably even take longer because they're, I don't know. I've got a friend who's at another Lutheran church about 30 miles away from me. I think they take even longer because it's every family unit. It's, anyways, not to derail, but it is interesting to me because I've been in like 3 or 4 different types of church, and they all approach it very differently. So,
yeah, the distribution is going to vary based on the size of the congregation and some of the resources you have. Like if you, for whatever reason, don't have an altar rail or something like that. I've been to a church near Fort Hood when I was doing some training there, where you like literally went around the table in a circle. Little weird. I don't know that anything was wrong with it, but you just see like a varying number of ways and methods of distribution just based on the resources and size of the church and such.
Yeah,
I haven't been to a Lutheran church where it's like irreverent though.
Yeah, for sure. Blessings. Okay, cool. So what did you actually end up studying at Liberty?
So interestingly, my undergraduate, I just goofed off my entire 4 years of college. I mean, like I said, I wasn't, I never like abandoned the faith or anything that drastic. I was responsible and whatnot, but I basically just like took the easiest classes possible. I was my major was criminal justice with a cognate and strategic intelligence. A lot of the guys that go into that, they either want to go into one of the letter agencies since they're in Virginia, or they want to go be a police detective. But for me, I was an ROTC scholarship guy. My plan going into college was I was going to be an active duty, go Army Rangers, active duty my whole life.
Hmm.
And then I went on my first FTX and was like, wait, the Army kind of sucks. And so I decided very quickly that I wasn't going to want to go active duty. I'm still in the Army Reserves. And I like it much more now that it's not the cadet environment. But I was unable to change my major by the time I realized I didn't want to go active duty because, of course, if the Army is going to pay for my college, you're not going to want me to add on to it by changing majors too late in the game. That's totally reasonable. So I was kind of stuck with the major I had. And so I get out of college and I'm looking for my first, out of college big boy job. I'd been working at a wood shop for a little while. And I was pretty much just trying to figure out what I was going to do before I moved to Tampa. When I was going to live with a hockey team, and this was before I moved to Tampa. I lived with a old hockey teammate there for a little while, and I just couldn't find anything that appealed to me. Not only related to my major, but just anything in general. I was like, man, like adult work just does not appeal to me. I like the school environment a lot, and I remember my dad kind of joking, and this is why I laughed when you asked because like it's kind of funny to think back on. My dad kind of jokingly said I should become a teacher if I like school so much, but I kind of thought about it for a second. I'm like, you know what? It's kind of a good idea. So I ended up getting my certifications that summer because this was around the summertime before I moved to Tampa. And, from there, shortly after, I couldn't find anything that school year because I had gotten certified a little late because I was jumping into this career so late in the game anyway. So couldn't find anything for that particular school year. And of course, then COVID hit just a few months later.
Yeah.
And then I was still unable to find a teaching job. And so during that period when COVID was going on, there was a Calvary, the Calvary Chapel churches or whatever. They had a school near where I was living in Clearwater, kind of the Palm Harbor area. And the principal there was very helpful in kind of tutoring me on how to become more qualified to be a teacher. I wanted to teach history. And if you have any teaching friends, like they'll tell you the hardest position to get at a school is history because everyone wants to teach history. So she recommended like, hey, it's obviously not going to be cheap or easy, but get a master's degree and you become much more hireable. And so I was in a position of luck since the Army had paid for all of my undergrad studies. I had a number of other scholarships that I earned in high school, along with, alumni scholarships and other military scholarships. And I was able to get my grad degree in education completely without having to spend a dime.
Awesome.
So yeah, very, very fortunate on that end to have that many resources. But so I got my education degree. I finished that in the fall of 21 while I was teaching my first semester at my current school. And I did indeed become a history teacher. It's mostly 7th and 8th grade, early and modern U.S. history teach. I've got a world history class. And I'm actually teaching a church history class this semester too.
It's cool. You mentioned, we'll come back to the education thing, but you mentioned an old hockey teammate. Did you actually play organized hockey?
Yeah, so he's a buddy from college. I remember I met him at a D1 game. We weren't good or anything. This guy, we're at a D1 game. He played D3. I actually didn't even play club at all. We just kind of played casually together on like rec league teams and whatnot. And so this guy, I noticed at a D1 game was wearing a Tampa Bay Lightning jersey. So I'm like, oh, I'm from Orlando. That's my team. And we just hit it off immediately. His other roommate was a Nashville guy. He was from Nashville. And they became kind of my close friends that I go out and do dumb things with every weekend during college. And then so we played hockey all the way through. I'd hang out and play with him all the time. And after college, it was kind of our plan to move in together, which is what we did until I decided to move back home to get a job at a Lutheran school.
Gotcha.
Which is why I moved back home from Tampa.
Okay. What did you have a position you normally played?
Yeah, I'm a left winger. Okay. And the beer leagues I've played since then, I've been center. I don't usually play center, but when you get to beer league and it's mostly just 30-year-old wash-ups, somebody needs to have the stamina to play center. And I was never the stamina guy anyway, but I guess since I'm younger, I've got more stamina than the guys who are, playing hockey in their mid-30s when they've got a family and whatnot. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm the stamina guy all of a sudden.
Yeah,
And so I've mostly played center since playing beer league, but my real position is left wing. I
gotcha.
like to play along the walls.
What's
I'm a
your
big guy.
what's your face off percentage? Yeah.
Um, I don't, since it's beer league, I don't have like even much more than a guess. I do okay for a guy who kind of jumped into center after his athletic prime. I think I do okay.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I don't beat the best guys, but I beat the worst guys. I'm probably somewhere in the middle as far as face-offs go.
I can't even imagine getting back on a rink right now in my current state. So,
Do you play?
yeah,
Or did you play?
I didn't play anything super organized, but we had
Mm.
I was homeschooled most of my life, so we had homeschool co-op that played up because I'm
Mm.
from Canada. So
Really? You're
that's
from where? Sorry.
I'm from Canada. I'm from British Columbia. So
Oh, right. I was gonna say a homeschool co-op playing hockey. Sign me up.
yeah, it was awesome.
Canada, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Well, yeah, hockey is football up there basically. Football and basketball
Mm.
rolled into one. So
Right.
yeah, but that's cool. And so you're I'm gonna say I know why you're a Lightning fan and not a
Mm.
Panthers fan, right? It has nothing
Well,
to
yeah,
do.
I mean, the Central Florida, we're the Lightning kind of area anyway, but also, of course, the Lightning have been great over the last decade. I remember
Yeah, for
when I
sure.
first got into hockey as a young boy, a friend of mine when I was in first grade from the Midwest was a big Red Wings fan, got me into
Mm,
hockey, and I just rooted for my local team. And that was 2004 when the Lightning won our first cup.
yep.
You're not from Calgary, right?
No.
Okay, good, because I was going to say that puck didn't cross the line in Game 6.
So yeah, how you feel toward Calgary, I feel toward Boston. Um,
Okay, what do you Leafs? Oh, Canadiens.
no, actually Canucks.
Oh, Canuck. Oh, of course, of course.
Yeah,
What was that? 2012 or 11?
2011.
It was
Yeah,
12, right?
lost in game. No, 2011. Lost in game
It
seven
was
at
2011.
home.
Right.
Ah, wounds will never fully heal.
Oh yeah, I was not quite into hockey at that time, but I definitely know just because I've gone so into the game since. After that lockout in '05, I kind of lost interest until I went into college, and that's when I started to play. Was actually in college.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
A little bit of niche. Maybe a few Canadians maybe watching this will be
yeah, there's gonna
excited
be a
about
couple
it.
people maybe get that.
In the comments, whoa!
Yeah,
Someone else mentioned our sport. Uh,
yeah.
okay, cool. Well, that was fun. So you did you specifically want to teach at a Lutheran school, or were you open to all possibilities?
Well, I mean, as someone who wanted to teach history specifically, I kind of had to be open to all possibilities. In the place where I was living when I started all this in Tampa, the only Lutheran school was all the way in St. Pete. I was in the north
Okay.
part of Clearwater. That's not exactly a short commute. They didn't have any openings at all for any teaching position. So I was kind of just wanting to break into the teaching vocation, period. I remember I wasn't just certified in history, I was certified in English and science as well. I was pretty much just willing to do whatever I could do to get hired. Um, and so I started my teaching career out as a long-term substitute in the public school system. It was a Title I school in Dunedin during the COVID year. So obviously a pretty
Yeah.
rough start to my teaching career. And it became pretty clear that one, I wanted to go home, making, the money you make as a substitute teacher was not enough to sustain me to pay rent at this guy's house or anything like that. So I moved home because there were two Lutheran schools in my area. There's the one at St. Luke's, the parish I currently am a member at, and then there is also Holy Cross, which is actually right next to the house I grew up in, where I currently teach at. And
Okay.
those were two good opportunities. They're both decent sized schools. There were other schools in the area that I could have possibly gotten opportunities at. So I finished that year, that 2020 to 2021 year, basically just substituting at St. Luke's and Holy Cross, hoping that there would be a position that would open up. And it's actually kind of crazy how it happened. So I was at Holy Cross. Their gym teacher was retiring at the end of the year. And I'm like, you know what, man? Like, I just want to get a full-time teaching job so I can actually make some money and buy a house, which I've been fortunate to do. And, I've been living in this house for about a year and a half, and I got to buy it. And so I said, whatever, I'll just apply to be a gym coach. So I do that. They interview me. I had already been working there as a sub. They I guess they liked me enough to say, yeah, like, please come on. And what's kind of crazy is 2 weeks before the 21 to 22 school year started, I was in Virginia, and I get a call from the principal one morning saying, "Hey, are you still interested in teaching history?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know it's like right before the school year starts, but I'm there." The previous history teacher who I replaced wasn't planning to retire for another year or two, but I guess this is at kind of the beginning of the crazy house market growth here in Florida and most other areas as well. And he got $40,000 above the asking price on his house. And so he just kind of bit, because that's more than he's going to make in a year teaching at an LCMS school anyway. Might as well.
Yeah.
And so he retired early, and I got to fill his position. And it was a stressful first semester because I've got I had 4 different classes to prep, and grad school to finish, including my thesis. And so that was and buying a house too.
Yeah.
And so pretty crazy first semester of teaching, but don't regret it at all. I really love it at this school.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of really stressful life events like packed in together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that was a crazy fall.
Yeah, for sure. We've been in this current place for just under a year. And yeah, I hated the whole like house hunting process just because the market at the time, the market was so competitive here. It's calmed down a little bit, but it was just insane.
Yep.
So
yeah, I bought around the same time.
Yeah, we put in offers on I think 7 or 8 houses, like for 50, 60 grand above asking, and nothing.
50, 60. Man, I thought it was tough.
It's brutal. Well,
yeah, I had a similar scenario. Well, actually, sorry, a not similar scenario. I was able to get the first house I put an offer on.
That's awesome.
Which was lucky because I know, most other people, it didn't go that way. I think I just had a really great real estate agent. She's a family friend. So I think I just got lucky.
That's good. So tell me a little bit then about the school. Is it for example, my daughter is in a public charter, which is a classical school. And she went through some of the same kind of insanity when it came to COVID. Her former daycare actually hosted a virtual classroom. So she couldn't go to school, and I don't know if I should say the word COVID on this. We might get a disclaimer on the podcast. But so she couldn't go to her class. This is kindergarten, going into kindergarten. She couldn't go to class at her new school, but she could go to her old daycare and sit in a classroom with a bunch of other people and have them facilitate them going to school on iPads. Just so stupid, like completely stupid. And this was early on when no one knew what was going on. We were all still trusting the government, or for the most part. And I was like, what? Why is this a thing? This is so dumb. She's in a classroom. Why can't she be in her class? Anyways, I don't want to derail, but
where are you now?
So I'm in a suburb of Dallas.
Okay, so you're in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'd figured Texas would be pretty okay with COVID.
They didn't loosen up quite as soon as Florida did, but they did a lot. There were some, I'm going to say there were some positives that came out of it. One was delivery alcohol. So you can get margaritas from your favorite restaurant, delivered.
Yep, we had that happen too.
Yep. So that was a positive. For me, now I work from home full time, which is great. Not everyone likes that, but for me, I'm kind of introverted, so I kind of prefer that. So there's still a few things that are hanging around that are actually a bonus, but for the most part, it was a negative.
Sure. Right. Yeah. So in the free state of Florida, things were actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Like everywhere else, we closed out that 2020 school year without anyone really returning. We had the option for people to learn online for that school year that I was not yet teaching full time. And by the time I did come on to teach full time, everyone was back in person.
Yeah.
Which, as far as the way other states did the COVID year, the first COVID year anyway, I think we did an okay job. I say that as someone who was not yet teaching full time at that point. But it seemed to me better than people who I knew were in other states kind of struggling even more than we were.
Yeah.
So as far as the COVID stuff goes, I think we did a halfway decent job in hindsight of not going too crazy. but also giving it the caution it was due.
Yeah, luckily that didn't last too long. And they,
No, it didn't last too
yeah,
long in Florida. I remember churches had opened up right after, almost suspiciously, right after Easter. So I actually missed my first Easter service as a Lutheran because of COVID. It
yeah,
was like I think like the week after or 2 weeks after that they reopened, of course.
yeah. After the important stuff, it's all important.
Right.
But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I'm super looking forward to Easter. So
Mhm.
it's yeah. Okay, cool. So when it comes to your school in particular, and maybe you could speak about the other one in your area as well. What kind of curriculum do they use, and how is it different from, say, like a normal like public school or something like that?
So both the school I'm at and then my parish's school, they don't follow a classical model. It's kind of your standard four core. Of course, they've got a Bible class, which I'm assuming St. Luke's does as well. But at our school, it is considered a core class, so it's a fifth core. I actually really like the way we do it. When I first came on, every teacher taught a Bible class, which in theory is great because you want all your teachers to be biblically literate and able to teach it. But of course, like most Lutheran schools, especially ones that don't follow the classical model, most of the teachers at our school are not Lutheran. That said, of course, they've all I don't doubt that the faith of all the teachers at our school is very genuine. They're good on that. But if we're going to be a Lutheran school, like you would never have like a Calvary school or whatever other non-denominational school have a Lutheran teaching Bible. So why would we be any different?
Yeah,
And we've actually changed that. So now that it's only Lutherans teaching the Bible class. We've got one woman who's teaching the middle schoolers. One of the pastors at the church teaches theology, and then the husband of the other woman I mentioned, he essentially functions as a deacon. I know we don't really have deacons in the LCMS, but functionally speaking, that's basically his job at this church. He also teaches theology. So we've got the right cast of people teaching our Bible studies now. It's considered a core class. If you don't pass it, then you'd have to repeat it, which is good because we didn't used to do that. We take it seriously now, and we should.
that's awesome. That's
Mhm.
really good. Yeah, I would have loved. I was homeschooled, and I got Bible class from my pastor father. So not
Mhm.
officially, but yeah, we used. I forget the actual origin of most of the curriculum that we used. It was from some, I think, fundamental organization, maybe in Florida, but anyways, there's a few of them around there. I know that Pensacola does a Becca and that sort of thing, and a lot of places use that. But so the aside from the Bible class, the curriculum is not necessarily explicitly Christian. Um,
Um, in theory, sure. I mean, you're having teachers who are integrating their Christian worldview into the lessons they teach, but of course, there's only so many places to do that, right? Like when I'm teaching about, you know, the history of medieval Japan, it's kind of hard to integrate Christianity into it other than to say, and here's why we're Christian and they're not, or kind of generic stuff that you almost have to shoehorn in.
yeah,
Um, but there's not like a classical model where you're studying grammar, logic, rhetoric as it relates to the faith. It's not as holistic as a classical model would be, but it is there.
that's cool.
Um, the science is Christian based. Um, and insofar as you can integrate a Christian worldview into algebra, it is done. We've got a chapel every week. It's on Wednesdays. So they're not in the places it makes sense to not have to shoehorn Christianity into places where it wasn't going to naturally fit. It is there. We do a pretty good job of that, I'd say.
hmm That's cool.
I do like the more holistic approach that a classical model would take. But we're not a classical school, so obviously that expectation isn't going to be
For
there.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that's all right. I think like some kids don't do as well in classical. It's
Yeah,
a
sure.
little bit more rigid in some ways. Ours is,
Yeah.
yeah, the one we go to, or my daughter goes to, is it's not a Christian school, but I think like most of the teachers are Christians.
Hmm.
There's a ton of Christians who send their kids there. A lot from my old church, and yeah,
Hmm.
I met a few people at my current church who are involved there as well. So it's kind of interesting because it's not a completely secular school, but it's
Hmm.
not officially a Christian school. I don't know. So yeah, worldview, like you said, that could be interesting.
Yeah. The classical model tends to draw from people who are going to have a Christian worldview. It's just the way things are taught that appeals to our faith. The modern system, wherever you want to say its origins are, whether it be the Prussian school systems model or the more modern like 20th century, like the Dewey and the Montessori's, where it's more self actualization. That's kind of what the modern education and public education system is built around,
Yeah.
and that's inconsistent with the Christian worldview because the purpose of education isn't self-actualization. I mean, obviously, self-actualization isn't something to avoid; it's a good thing, but that's not the purpose of education. And the classical model, even if it's being approached secularly, is going to attract Christians or other religious people, even because we have a different philosophy of education than what the pagan world is going to have.
Yeah. So what would you say for at least the two schools that are around there? What would you say makes them, or what's the draw? And the second part of that would be, is your student base primarily Lutheran, or is there a wide range of other faiths, or at least Christian traditions?
So for the first question, I'll kind of just address it towards my school. Not that I don't want to talk about my own parish's school. I really don't know as much about it, other than that it's a little larger. I think what's appealing to ours at first glance as a parent would be probably the class size. My biggest class I've ever had is 18.
Hmm.
And I'm more really average around 13, 14 throughout my time there. It's manageable. It's very easy to actually attend to the students. And I think as a teacher, I've been given a lot of independence to be able to teach under the model that I think is appropriate. So I remember coming in as a first year teacher, the old principal, we have a new principal this year, but the principal who was there when I started, she really just let me like she did not give me training wheels. And I mean that in a positive
Hmm.
way. I mean, she just said, she had a lot of trust in a brand new teacher who she had no reason to trust. And I think I was all the better for it because she really let me do the class the way I thought was best. And I think that worked out well. I'm pretty proud of the way I teach. I take it pretty seriously, and the amount of trust I've had from an administration, both the former and the current one, has been really phenomenal. So I think a lot of parents see that the teachers really enjoy working here. The classes are manageable. The administration is extremely supportive. And I know those are kind of secular reasons. They're not really related to why it's good to be at a Lutheran specific school. But maybe being part of a Lutheran school system just comes with a better quality environment. Sometimes it's not specifically theological or spiritual. It's
Yeah.
sometimes just, hey, like we know how to make school systems work.
I mean, education was a really big part of Lutheranism, honestly, even from the beginning.
Yeah, that was kind of something I wanted to talk about because that was kind of the part of the Reformation that gets unsung, not because people don't find it important, but because it's not as broad or appealing. Because obviously, everyone at the church wants to know about the church, but not everybody at the church needs to know about education reform. But it's easy to see why among the other streams of Christianity, why Lutherans prioritize education so highly. I mean, the LCMS and the Wells have the second and third largest, respectively, church systems in the country. And we're way smaller than the Baptists or the Episcopalians or the Catholics, and I do believe it's the Catholics who are at number one, but that also
Okay.
makes sense. But why is a denomination of like I think not quite 2 million people have such a large school system? Well, it's because they're the people who kind of pioneered our tradition, as it were. Luther was a professor of Old Testament studies at a university. Melanchthon wasn't ordained at all. He was also primarily involved in education. And the big bulk of their work outside of their theological work was in education. I mean, Luther's biggest contribution outside of his theology was his reform of the education system in Wittenberg, and that's actually why I'm such a big proponent of classical education, where you're going to have that trivium with the grammar, logic, rhetoric, the quadrivium with the math or the algebra, the geometry, astronomy, and music, which I think is an interesting fourth thing for a science-based category,
Hmm.
but makes sense. Um, that was the model that made the Lutheran Reformation so successful. Education was such a high priority, and that remained the case even until the first, LCMS Lutherans moved to the United States. And the classical model of Lutheran schools worked very well, even in the frontiers of the Midwest, until World War One. And the reason that changed was because, now World War One's going on. You Germans have to integrate into American society. You've got to go to our schools, learn English. So you kind of saw I don't want to say death, but certainly the decay of classical Lutheran education during and after World War One. I think it's something we're still kind of working to recover.
Yeah, that's when the flag started being brought into the sanctuaries as well.
Yeah.
We weren't Nazis. Yeah. And I say we, like...
Well, this was World War One. This was World War One where they started putting the flag. But same idea, to show that the Germans who got essentially kicked out of Germany don't all of a sudden sympathize with the people who they deliberately left behind. I've never understood that. I've tried to look more into it. I can't find anything in particular of, why were there concerns that the German Americans supported the Prussians, because, we left for a reason. So I'm not really sure about the history of that. Of course, we have contacts still in Germany. There's a great documentary I saw of a English infantry officer giving an interview decades after the war, the First World War. And he actually talked about how they would segregate the Saxon soldiers from each other. So Saxon soldiers wouldn't serve in Saxon units because there's still, even in the early 20th century, there was still so much animosity between the Saxon Lutherans and the Prussian officers, because, the Saxons and the Prussians still had a lot of bad blood against each other. And so they would actually keep Saxon soldiers away from each other and their infantry units for that reason. And so Germany, I know no one needs to be told this because we all just inherently know it, but Germans are messed up people. And we had to deal with the brunt of that here in the United States when, our school systems were broke up and we had to go into the American public school system, which was such a step down from the classical model.
Yeah. Do you have German ancestry?
On my mom's side, yeah. My dad's side were French Canadian.
Okay.
And then, and then my mom's side, they're all from mostly Saxony or Thuringia.
I was laughing earlier because I'm like, yeah, we Germans. And I'm like, I'm not German in the slightest sense. I'm like Scottish, English, Italian, from like, So my Canadian ancestors are from like Ontario and kind of Eastern, but not French. They're not French. They're the English. And then on my father's side, it's like Scottish and an Italian grandmother. So yeah, just slumming it with the Germans now.
Yeah.
Everyone's named Preuss or,
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, my church is kind of interesting. We're a self-church, the Slovakian church, the other non-geographic diocese. Okay. And obviously Slovakian culture is not prevalent now, but you still got a lot of really Slovakian last names like, Jovag or Duda and stuff like that, things that are very not English.
Gotcha.
And so it's been a long time, I think, since they've actually done Slovakian services at my parish. But it's you still see a lot of like, echoes of the Slovakian heritage there. It's really cool.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I haven't explored it in depth, but it is very interesting, the different Lutheran traditions that, in a way, in maybe a similar sense, Orthodoxy is maybe tied to like Russian or Greek or something like that. There's these different streams of like Finnish Lutherans, German Lutherans, Swedish Lutherans, Slovakian Lutherans. So that's fascinating. I need to like study up on these people because some of them don't hold to the same exact confessions that we do. I think they hold to like part of the Book of Concord, essentially, not all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know in the Scandinavian Church historically they only ascribe to the unaltered Augsburg Confession, and the reason for that is because they never had to deal with crypto Calvinists. I mean, the reason we have the Solid Declaration and the Formula is because there's that division between the Gnesial Lutherans, the actual ones, and then the Philippists, who were basically just Calvinists in sheep's clothing. And that made additions to the Book of Concord necessary to clarify, like, hey, like, what is our communion? What do we believe? And that was not a problem that they ever dealt with in Scandinavia because the Reformed theology never really found a foothold there.
Yeah.
At least not a very solid
based.
one.
And that's from someone who has a ton of like Calvinist friends and used to be a Calvinist, but
Mhm. Yeah.
hopefully they can take the shot. Um, so not to, and that hopefully this question doesn't come off. Oh, let's go back. Let's circle back a little bit. Actually, are your
Mhm.
students primarily Lutheran, or are there other people scattered in?
I'm so sorry. I
No, no,
forgot
I
to
meant to
answer that
circle
second
back, and
question.
I rabbit trailed. So
Right. No, they're not. If I had to ballpark, I'd say probably 10 to 15% are
okay,
Lutheran. As far as I know, like I've never seen any of them at my parish. There's another parish in downtown Sanford, very close to the school. Perhaps some go there. But naturally, if it's going to be, if you're sending your kid to a Lutheran school and you are a Lutheran, you're probably going to go to that church. And it's a relatively small minority. To be honest, I'd say probably as many of our kids, probably more of our kids don't go to church at
okay,
all than go to any kind of church, let alone a Lutheran church. I would say
hmm.
that's not unusual, especially in Florida. It's a pretty secular state. I know we vote very red, but that by no means indicates that we are religious. In fact, our county, Seminole County, is the least church attending county in the entire state of Florida. So that statistic should probably be even less surprising. It's something
Hmm.
like less than 9 or 8% of people in this county go to church weekly or more. Relatively that amount of attendance. So very, very few people go to church at all at our school, let alone a Lutheran church. I'd say probably less than half do,
Yeah.
if I had to guess. This is a
Do you
guess.
think that's just some cultural conservatism that's a holdover that makes them want to send their kids to a religious school, or because
Yeah, I think it.
I was
Go.
just
Sorry.
like,
Go ahead.
for me, I don't think I would want, like, if I wasn't a believer, I don't think I would have any inclination to send my kids to a Christian school. But
Yeah, that's something that's never made a lot of sense to me. Obviously, we're happy to teach them. Perhaps we'll make Christians of them yet. I don't know that the catechetical model is strong enough or holistic enough to really make that change happen as we're currently practicing it. But you know, God can work however He wants, of course. Um, it's a hard question to answer because Florida is such a diverse place as far as spirituality and everything else goes. I've got kids whose parents are deliberately anti-religious
hmm,
that choose to send their kids to our school because they just like the quality of the education. Their kid who would
interesting.
struggle badly in a public school is able to get proper attention and education at our school, and they're willing to have them not care about a religious class in order to make sure that they get a good otherwise
Hmm,
education. So I've got a lot of kids, and it is mandatory now for them to pass these religious classes, which is good. But I just don't know if it's quite enough to actually effectively change the culture and make these kids Christians. And that's a tough battle to
yeah,
do because if it's hard to convert kids if the parents are not also Christian. Because like if the only religious exposure they get is at school, like that's just not enough. Even if you have a great model to do it, like it needs to be they're frequently going to a church on Sunday. Like that's really what it takes.
yeah, hmm, that is interesting. Um, okay, so what would you say, in your opinion, maybe generally, what could Lutheran education like improve on? Maybe in the states, maybe maybe in the U.S. as a whole, or maybe your state, or what do you think?
So I can tell you just because we actually have a pretty decent network of all the Lutheran churches here in Florida. Even though my school is also part of the Slovakian Lutheran Church, along with my current parish. I don't say current like I'm about to change, by the way. But we interact with all the other Lutheran schools in the state, which by and large are Florida Georgia District. I would say this: it's got to be a more holistic approach. I mean, the culture of the school itself has to be much more directly geared towards catechesis. I mean, like much deeper study of the catechism, um, and even like just kind of getting rid of the entertainment model of learning in general. I mean, it would be unreasonable to try and get us to switch to a classical model. I'm not saying we need to go that far. That would require re-educating basically the entire staff, myself
Yeah,
included. That's not a pragmatic way to fix the problem. I think basically the solution is going to be make this specifically Lutheran education. At the very least, if you were to start a Lutheran homeschool co-op or some other such thing, I know of another church that my girlfriend's parish. They're starting to consider doing something like that. I really think that's the only way because I think the biggest problem in the LCMS right now is our age. right?
Mhm.
We're the oldest denomination, I believe, in the country. If we're not, we're probably second or third, along with the other Lutheran denominations, even the ELCA,
Yeah.
right? Um, the problem is not that we're not doing enough contemporary worship. Like that's not the reason we keep getting older. The reason we keep getting older is one, and I know this might be a little controversial because some people in the LCMS just won't admit it. Birth control is like you're not going to sustain the population of your church if you're having one or maybe two kids. You're just not. But beyond that, I think the bigger issue is, we've got kids who are growing up kind of nominally Lutheran. They might even go to church every week, but they're not really taught to really understand or appreciate why we're different. So they're going to go to youth gathering. They're going to see the contemporary worship. They're going to say, oh, like that's what we should be. And then they're going to go off to their first year of college. They're going to be attracted by the pretty colors on the other side of the house, and they're going to go to that. And I think
Yeah.
it's really important that we catechize our kids to say, like, here's why we worship the way we worship. We need to kind of stop sitting on the fence and just say, hey, like, contemporary worship is not only at odds with Lutheran identity, it's just not biblical. And even the kind of half-hearted boomer worship with the weird mid-century modern stuff that kind of is deliberately abstract, I think, like that kind of makes a confession that isn't helpful towards getting our biblical ideas across. And I think if we're really going to truly appeal to people to stay past 18 when they go to their first year of college and they stop caring, we need to teach them why to care. And I think that comes with the two most important elements of being confessional, and that's understanding and appreciating, the conservative, authentic, biblical approach to theology, but also our worship, which should also be, like those two things are not, like they're together. They're one and the same.
Yeah. That's some fun and controversial topics there. Hit on birth control, contemporary worship. You have any more sacred
Yeah.
cows you want to slaughter in front of us?
Well, I made fun of Ronald Reagan last week on the meme page, and I think I made some people upset about that. I don't even dislike Ronald Reagan. I just don't think he's like the face of the Republican Party. I don't know why that's a controversial thing to say.
People want to talk about Lincoln and Reagan, and I'm like, I have problems with both y'all.
Yeah, I mean, well, here's something crazy about Lincoln. A lot of people don't know. He was pen pals with Karl Marx.
You serious?
Yeah, he wrote. Now, he wasn't a full-on Marxist. I'm not accusing him of that, but Abraham Lincoln and Marx had a much more similar philosophy of the world than I think you might assume.
That's fascinating.
Based on time period and, where they were in the world. Like Lincoln was no Marxist, but he certainly sympathized with that kind of worldview at large.
Yeah, well, I mean, the federal government expanded under Lincoln, I mean, in a very direct way.
Yeah, and I mean the whole, seizing church property and kind of suspending, Maryland state government just on the possibility that they might not support the war. And it's easy to be armchair general. Like I don't know if I would act any differently if I was president during a civil war. So I'm not going to cast too many judgments on Lincoln, but it's just interesting the people we choose to idolize in our civic world. I can say that as
well, you're from the South, so you've got to make borderline statements that anger people on both sides.
Well, hey, here's the thing people don't realize about Florida. I'm blanking on his name, but the governor of Florida during the Civil War, when he heard that the South had officially surrendered, he actually took his life rather than re-enter the Union.
Wow.
So, people say Florida is not a Southern state. I challenge any governor of the Confederacy to be more anti-Union than that. And I'm not necessarily a Confederate supporter by any means, but the history, of course, to me is going to be very interesting.
Texas is kind of in that gray area as well. Some people claim they're not Southern enough, but I didn't grow up here.
It was John Milton who was our governor.
That's interesting. I never knew that. Yeah, I grew up reading like some of those kind of adventure stories, that boys read, and most of the time, for whatever reason, I don't think it was intentional, but the Confederates were the heroes in those stories, even if they were losing. They were kind of written from that side, which I found interesting. I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back, so a little bit of a.
Yeah, you see a lot of stuff like that purely for the sake of like reunifying the country. I mean, that's why so many army bases were named after Confederate generals. It was like, hey, like we're on the same team again, you can keep your heroes. And, unfortunately, they're starting to change that. They're renaming Fort Bragg. I think they're going to rename Fort Lee. And it's unfortunate because the reason they named those bases after those men wasn't to glorify them. It was to, show that we're one country
Yeah.
again. And that's an important statement to make in the wake of the Civil War. And I believe Fort Lee specifically was made shortly, like around the time of World War
Yeah.
One. But the whole reason of naming those bases after those men wasn't necessarily to glorify their legacy so much as to show like, hey, we really are one country again, and that's not something you can just erase.
Almost like the reason that they're being erased now is to spread disunity, but
And of course, that's the real reason. But we'd be preaching to the converted if we got into
it's
that.
true. Red meat, throw red meat to the crowd, get the clicks and views up. Cool. Okay, so you are an aspiring seminarian. So does that mean you have plans to attend? You are already on track. What's the scoop?
Yeah, so I've actually started the application. I'm pretty much just waiting. My girlfriend and I want to be married before we start. I actually visited the Fort Wayne Seminary over summer. I spent a week in those dorms and said, I'm going to get married before I start seminary.
Bro, yeah.
And so that's actually the plan. We'd like to be married before we start. And it just makes more sense to do that way, even if it, I'm obviously embellishing about the dorms. So not that bad, especially if you're a bachelor fresh out of your undergrad.
Yeah.
But it just makes more sense for us to be married and then start seminary now that we're at this kind of
point.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to a Bible college, and the dorms were segregated, and we lived all 4 years in the dorms. There wasn't any of this moving off campus when you're an adult or whatever. So I remember my wife and I occasionally have nightmares that we are married and back and have to be in the dorms. So it's a thing. So yes, I recommend being married before that, because that's a 4-year program, right? Relatively.
Yeah, you can do it in 3. I haven't looked into exactly which one of those options I'll take. Obviously, now that I'm not out of undergrad anymore, I've been working. I would like to just get back to work as soon as possible. If it's possible for me to do it in 3, I'd have to kind of test out of some of those classes before I take them. I'm not that far in the process yet, so I don't really know. I'd like to do it in 3 if possible, but my assumption is it'll
Gotcha. And that's for an MDiv to be a pastor?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not going to go for the sacred theology or whatever that one is. I think the reason a lot of guys go for that one specifically is so they could go for a doctorate. But I've already got 1 master's under the belt, so that's not really necessary if I even want to go for a doctorate. And at this point, I'm like, dude, I'm done with school. I'm going to get through the MDiv and just be like, I'm ready to work and not be interrupted anymore.
One of my pastors just got done with the SMP. And then the other one, actually, he's a lot old. He's not a lot older. He's probably in his 50s, early 50s. Sorry, pastor, if I get it wrong. And he just got his doctorate, I think, from St. Louis. So, or, probably 3 years ago at this point. I think it was just prior to COVID where he graduated. But yeah, I mean, and he's well established. He's already had his, a few different calls and, a family that's, grown up. So, so you desire to be a pastor. You've gotten that, I guess, external call as well, or not officially, of course, but you've been affirmed by your pastors and that sort of thing that you should pursue it.
Yeah, the pastor I do my confession with, he's kind of walked me through the process of getting all that going. I'm not very far in the actual application itself yet, just because the earliest I would likely go would be the fall of 24. Okay. So still a decent ways away. My girlfriend and I are still, we're going to get through the whole marriage process. We're going to, we don't have any solid dates for that even yet either, but we're going to get through that, have another year of work under our belts, and then at the earliest begin fall of 24. But my pastor's been very supportive of it. I've not gone so far into the process yet as interviewing with our district president, Valdemar Vinovskis. I don't know how that would even work, because obviously since we're non-geographic, he's in Pennsylvania. I don't assume he's going to come all the way to Florida for an interview. So I actually don't know exactly how the full process works, but I've got the basics, and I've got a lot of support from my church. We're in a pretty good financial situation, my church, and I've been lucky enough that my church has been willing to say, like, hey, like we'll make sure that you can get through without too much financial issue, which And on top of that, the church has been really great right now. The church in general, not my specific parish, about making tuition
Yeah.
free. So now's the time to go. If there's any other potential seminarians considering and discerning, now's the time to go, because the church is making tuition
Yeah.
easy right now. All of my pastors, they had to pay for tuition and
Yeah.
housing. That's not something you're probably going to have to
That's
make.
fantastic. I really hope that, I don't know if it's made a difference yet, but I really hope it does. Getting more seminarians in.
Yeah, I've not looked at the statistics or anything. I'll say this: when I was I was there in the summertime, so the campus was obviously a little more empty because the summer is not a busy period at any school. But it seemed like a nice, healthy crop of young men there starting summer Greek. I mean, socially well adjusted. I know kind of the stereotype. The pastor at the school I work for, he's like, dude, seminarians are weird. And so I went expecting that. And obviously you got some goofballs. People who like theology were going to be that way. But like, you could tell that all those guys, like, they're going to be good pastors. You can tell. And I'm sure it's just like that at
That's
St.
awesome.
Louis too.
That's good. So you are planning then on being a pastor in the LCMS. What would you say, are the biggest strengths of the LCMS in general?
This is almost too much of a easy answer, but like, it's our theology. I mean, we've got the clear confession of the apostles. I mean, like, I know, like, Catholic or whoever is going to laugh at that, but I would not have become a Lutheran if I wasn't completely convinced that that was the case. And I think we really need to lean into it and like say, hey, like we can't be, and I don't think we necessarily are, but we can't be kind of on the fence about what we believe. We need to be very adamant. Like, this is what we believe. Like, the sacraments are important. All these things that you kind of maybe associate with Lutheranism, that's got to be our emphasis, because that is what makes it such a strong church body. I don't know if this is actually true because I can never verify it. I was told by the first pastor I was under when I first became a Lutheran that apparently Billy Graham once said that the LCMS was the sleeping giant of the United States church. I have never been able to find anything to confirm that that's true.
Yeah.
But I think it is true. I think that we are theologically the sleeping giant of American Christianity. We just need to, wake up. And I think we do that by being authentic and really embracing what it is to be a confessional Lutheran. I think it's going to be maintaining that conservative approach to Scripture, that unflinching dedication to our theology. And I think it's going to mean an unflinching dedication to our worship as well, because it is so rich.
Mm-hmm.
Why trade Gerhard and Bach and Nikolai and Luther himself for, a knockoff Taylor Swift song? We can do so great. And we've got such a great history and a great foundation, both in the school and just in the culture of the church in general. And I think we've convinced ourselves that the others actually have it right, and we're just not willing to admit it.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to find ourselves at our best strength when we are comfortable with what we really are.
I wonder if, because I think the fastest growing, well, it's not solely a denomination, but the fastest growing denomination or kind of movement is charismaticism right now worldwide. And I wonder if there's some sort of like numbers envy at some level, or self-doubt perhaps, that maybe they've got the secret formula that we need to embrace to drive the youth back to our churches,
Yeah, I think certainly it's a lot of numbers envy. Here's another thing I think it could be. Though those people, for all their theological flaws, they care much more about each other than you're going to see in a historical Protestant or even Catholic denomination, where, and I don't think this is pietism. I think this is just people who understand what a deep need people have for community in a pagan world, and they know how to meet that need. I would also remark, charismatic churches around the world tend to be very fast burning flames. I think it was in the Philippines or somewhere else in Southeast Asia where there's this huge explosion of charismatic Christianity, and it's already come and gone, and they've kind of reverted back to whatever local religions they were before that. And so the numbers game can be very deceptive, because charismatics in particular tend to be very fast burning in flames, where they'll blow up for a time. And it's like the parable of the seeds, where it's going to root up, but since it has no root, it's going to wither and die. That tends to be, and I'm not going to say this universally, of course, but that tends to be a trait among charismatic churches around the world. Not universally, of course, but that's been
Yeah.
observed.
I have a theory that because there's so little mysticism and so few miracles emphasized in kind of the historic Baptist, because that's what I grew up in, so I'm familiar with it. And so I don't want to solely pick on them, but I'll stick with the territory I'm familiar with. There's nothing really miraculous that happens. And I think that people are looking for that in these places where, the sacraments are nothing more than a symbol. It's like, well, why would you don't look to that for anything miraculous, or that to feed your faith, or that to forgive your sins, by the power of God's word, of course. And so they start looking to all this other stuff, and they get their dopamine highs. And sounds like I'm being scornful, but I'm not really trying to. It's just, that's the function right there. They're looking for that experience.
Yeah, and that can actually, you can almost take the opposite approach, where I think Lutherans in the U.S. in general, I think we become too influenced by a number of different traditions, and I think in this regard, we've become too influenced by the Reformed. Like Lutheran theology is by no means necessarily cessationistic. We don't need to look down on people who are adamant that miracles occur. They certainly shouldn't be the basis of our faith. We have the ordinary means of grace in the sacraments, and the miracle of the Eucharist is the basis of the miracle we should be looking for. But that by no means, within the Lutheran context, means that God can't use extraordinary means of accomplishing His will, and we shouldn't look down necessarily on miracles. Now, of course, the miracles of the Pentecostals are often bogus. I remember, some of my stuff from college I won't get into, where it was very obviously just like self-fulfilling prophecy, and it was disingenuous at best.
Yeah.
But that doesn't cancel the reality that God can work however He wants to work either.
It's a good thought. So what would you say to people who are maybe like you were, maybe like I was a few years ago? They're burned out on kind of the emotional pop songs. There, and not every, like you said, you had a fairly solid non-denom church, but there are some that it's motivational speakers. It's basically a comedy routine. There's a lot of levels of problems, some worse than others. So for someone who's burned out on all that, what would you say to them? Like, what counsel would you give them?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is, like, your concerns are justified. I think what I've noticed, especially in my time living in Tampa, I think what I noticed, most of my friends, they went to the local big box mega church, and they were kind of spiritually infantilized. And I think in many ways those churches are less bringing in non-believers and more serving as, soft landing pads to secularism for people from other church traditions. That's very much my experience from what I've seen. I don't see a lot of people going to those churches who are new to the faith. It's more so that they're coming from their dad's Lutheran church or their mom's Catholic church, and they're going to hang out there for a couple of years before they stop going to church entirely. And if you're from one of those churches, from the broader array of American evangelicalism, regardless of exactly where, and you're concerned about that, I'd say your concerns are completely justified. And what I would suggest from there is, don't let your reaction to that error completely dictate where you go from there. A lot of people are going to jump straight to Rome because they see that as the exact opposite, or perhaps they go further east because they see that as an even bigger opposite to the errors of American Christianity. And certainly those are steps up. Like, if you're going from a wannabe Elevation Church to your local Boomer Novus Ordo Mass, that's still a step up, right? You're still getting the sacraments. You're still getting a more proper theology, a more proper whatever. But don't just make your reaction to one error let you jump into something, even if it's the Lutheran Church. Like, take time, spend months discerning what you think is the correct call. I think, my rubric doesn't necessarily need to be everybody's, but I think it's a good heuristic to say, think to yourself, who would need the shortest letter from St. Paul? go to visit a number of those different higher church traditions. Go check out the Lutheran parish. Go check out the Catholic, Orthodox, Anglican parish. Give them all a fair look, and give them the time that it's due to discern it. Because I think because I really spent so much time in discernment, I was able to not make my decision purely a reaction against my former background. And I think I'm in the better spot for it because, of course, I'm very convinced that my Lutheran landing spot was not just a matter of getting into a better spot than I was previously at, but getting into the best spot of all available
Yeah.
options.
Yeah, that's good advice. I've heard variations on that before, and that's similar to what I've seen or what I've given to some people is like, just take your time. Like, it's not, unless you're in like a completely heretical, full on, non-Orthodox church, then, get the heck out of there. But, you need some time to think, you need some time to process, you need time to study and pray and, go through all that. So I think that's good advice. So I feel like Lutherans, our closest cousins might be like Anglo-Catholic or conservative Anglicans. They've got some Reformed influence that we don't have necessarily, depending on where you go. But those are kind of the close cousins, I feel like, in the Protestant world anyway. So when churches like that, like that we're part of, or conservative Anglicans, or maybe even Roman Catholics, how can we best like minister to the evangelicals that maybe are burned out and they're looking for transcendence, or they're looking for like a bastion, against the postmodern kind of pagan world that we're heading into in the West? How can we reach out, best minister to them, like help them as they're roaming around?
Yeah, kind of the same thing I've been hitting on a lot of the night is just be willing to embrace what Lutheranism very authentically is. I mean, a great example from my own area. I'm going to give a bit of a shout out here. Um, the Central Florida region, since Florida does have so many people coming in, there actually is a pretty decently healthy population of LCMS churches that are doing okay at the very least, and some who are doing even better than that. Like my own church does very well, but a great example would be Zion Lutheran Church in Winter Garden.
Yeah.
That's the parish my girlfriend goes to. They actually just finished their new sanctuary. There are people driving from well over an hour because it's the only place to get an authentic Lutheran liturgy. That's a church that can very faithfully say that it upholds Article 24 of the Augsburg Confession. It is very, very, very eager to embrace the uniqueness that comes with the Lutheran tradition. We're not trying to be, an imitator of the local evangelical church, but with Lutheran theology. And we're not trying to be, I don't say we, I'm not a member of that parish, but they're not trying to be, that kind of washed up, like abstract mid-century modern kind of like some that only a boomer could be appealed to. And I don't say that to disparage boomers, but timelessness is important. If you're building a church to only appeal to one generation, like you see kind of both sides of this coin doing, you're going to have churches where everybody's got gray hair or nobody is above the age of 30 or having kids anyway. Neither of those are healthy ways to sustain a church population. I think when you embrace that more kind of transcendent beauty and embrace what it means to be uniquely Lutheran, you're going to have a healthy age population across the board. You're going to have your old people to serve as your leaders and your elders. You're going to have young people to sustain the population of the church and everything else in between. And I think when you tap into that kind of more transcendent beauty that appeals to everybody, not just one generation or the other, you're going to have a more healthy church as a result.
Yeah, that's good. I forget who. Oh yeah, no, it was Clay Travis. I don't know if you're familiar with Clay Travis. Outkick the Coverage. Yeah. So
yeah, I know Clay Travis.
Your best buds, right? So he just got back from a trip to Italy, and he mentioned that there are people flocking to Italy to view the architecture and the art and everything else that goes there. And he's like, he tweeted something to this effect. He looked around where he lives, in the U.S., and said, "Is anyone going to be coming here in 500 years or something to that effect?" And I'm like, "No, not to view the architecture, unless something radical happens." Um,
Well, hey, they do have the Pantheon in Nashville where he is. That weird cheap imitation.
no,
I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know why they have such a weird. Maybe they're sister cities with Athens or something. I don't know. But yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, he's hitting on to a point
yeah,
that's very true. I mean, no one is going to travel to the parish with the weird abstract Jesus with no crucifixes or no real attention to detail with the art. And of course, a rural or suburban church that's meant for a congregation of 200 people, we're not expecting the world of that, right? Not every church is going to be some brilliant
yeah,
basilica like what you're going to see from Renaissance Italy. And, most of those churches were funded through, oh gosh, how am I blanking on the indulgences? So
yeah,
I can't believe I blanked on that as a Lutheran. A lot of those churches were funded by indulgences, which you would obviously, as a Lutheran, we would say that that's a dubious way to
yeah,
build a church to begin with. But you don't need to be wealthy to
yeah,
be reverent. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen pictures of congregations in Africa who have basically nothing, but they still find a way to manage to put together something that is objectively beautiful and
hmm
reverent. And if they can do that with nothing, we could certainly do that with the resources we have in the United States. And so there's just not an excuse. It's just
yeah.
liturgical laziness.
My church, we've got a ton of stained glass. There's the Agnus Dei, which is the main focal point. There's
Right.
the Ark. There's Jesus and his disciples. There's Jesus' baptism. There's 4 or 5 different big pieces, and I love it. It's such a nice change from I grew up in a simple type church. We rented commercial buildings and seniors homes and stuff like that for a long time, and then we were in small country church type things. And then I went to a big box, met in a school, and then went to a kind of bigger box, former Walgreens church. And then you go to this objectively beautiful, it's not a cathedral, but it's beautiful and very reverent. And there's pews and a rail and, no crucifix, but there's a cross, and it's awesome. It really is. And like, I want that. The amount of excitement that you have for the Lutheran faith, the amount of excitement that I have for it, I want that for everyone. I want them to be as I want them to be able to enjoy their church experience, and actually dig in. So, anyways, I don't want to derail, but that's what I think. There's reverence and transcendence that in churches that, and I think Lutheranism has the best of both worlds. We're very, very biblical, and we're very, very Catholic in the good sense. So,
Yeah.
anyways, cool. Any other thoughts on the state of the LCMS, or where we should go from here?
No, I think that those are all, pretty good conversation points we had. If I were to summarize, I'd basically say, I think a good direction going forward for the LCMS is getting back to the classical model where it's possible. Obviously, I'm not suggesting we shut schools that exist already down. But the classical model is what made a very small minority religious affiliation survive for as long as it did until World War I. And obviously, we've grown and shrank and all this since then. But I think returning to a classical model and returning to of education, that is, and returning to a more authentically Lutheran kind of culture for the church in general, I think that's going to be a more long-term viable option than just trying to, contain the bleeding by adopting the methods of churches that
Yeah,
are also shrinking, right? Because like every Christian denomination right now is acknowledging the reality that the culture is getting more and more against us. That's true whether you're charismatic or you're the most niche kind of Eastern Orthodox you can think of. Like that's
yeah,
just the reality for the church here in the West. And I think the most long-term viable option for the Lutheran churches to survive is to
yeah.
be Lutheran.
Authentically Lutheran. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of niche, I've heard of like the Anglican. There's an Anglican rite, I think, in the Orthodox Church. There's
I
yeah,
know there's a Western Rite.
yeah. There's some
They got one in Miami.
fun times. Yeah,
I
me
don't know what that
either.
entails.
Maybe they use the Book of Common Prayer. Um, cool. All right. How about a lightning round? What's on your current reading
All right.
list?
All right, so I'm reading a great book called the Fathers of the Lutheran Church. It's basically a list of biographies and collected writings of a number of different Lutheran church fathers. I'm just finishing the one on Philip Nicolai. He's a favorite of mine. He was a huge polemicist, particularly against the Reformed. He was kind of around during the Crypto-Calvinist controversy. The next one, I'm not reading these in any particular order. I'm just going for the ones that look most interesting. The next one was a Swedish bishop who had kind of put together the Swedish education system, which is basically still the current
Hmm.
model in Sweden. And as many cultural problems as this place like Sweden has, their education
Hmm.
system is top notch. So clearly this guy was doing a good job. And then there's a Danish bishop who I also want to read about. I forget both of their names because they're silly Scandinavian names. But and then after that, I'm going to be reading Hammer of God. I think every pastor I've ever asked a book recommendation for, like their first or close to first suggestion is Hammer of God. So I'll be reading that whenever I
That's
finish
by
this one.
Bo Gertz.
Bo Gertz. That's right.
Okay.
Yep. And then I'm currently, I do 2 chapters a day of the Bible. When it's Lent, I go through the Gospels. I'm in the middle of Luke right now. So
I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah, here it is. So one of my pastors lent me a book called Scriptural Baptism, a dialogue between John Bapsted and Martin Childfont. I don't even know if I want to try to pronounce this name, but it's Scandinavian, and what you were saying made me think of it. Uras Sarnavara. There's like 17 A's in the entire name. Like, yeah, it's gotta be. But yeah, that it cracked me up because I'm like, I don't know, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that name on the
podcast. It sounds Finnish. I'll tell you, I can guess that
just
based on the number
I think there's
A's.
4, and they're all stuck together basically. So, all right, cool. So what? So you're reading a couple chapters a day. What Bible versions do you normally use?
So I typically read out of the Lutheran Study Bible, and I believe the only one they do for that is the ESV. I'm actually not terribly picky about what translation to use. I think as long as you are aware of where your preferred translation falls on the spectrum of how translations are done, broadly speaking, I think that's what kind of matters. Just don't use the meme translations like Amplified or the Passion Translation. I think as long as you are using at least a semi-respectable translation, and you know what your reading abilities are, I think that's what really matters. So I typically read out of the ESV just because I typically read out of the Lutheran Study Bible, but I know the NASB is pretty well respected. I've recently learned a lot of Lutherans still really like the KJV, which is interesting to me. So I'm not terribly picky on translations, but I typically use ESV.
That might be. I know there's some Anglo-Catholic or Anglican influence there for the King James, and of course, because that's one of the. That's their translation, really. There's also the Coverdale version, which I think is paired with the Psalter a lot. So, and they're both in they're in a kind of similar style. So, but I mean, I grew up King James only, so I kind of like, I gave up on that for a little while. But in this, I think in the same way that there's beauty in art and the church buildings, there's a lot of beauty and timelessness in the King James, in the language.
Oh yeah, I mean the diction and the pace is just not what you're going to get from like an NIV. I know Pastor Will Whedon, he's a big KJV fan, and I trust his word, so it must not be a bad translation if he likes it. I'm not picky.
That's cool. Anyway. All right, Tolkien, Lewis, or Chesterton?
That's tough. Tolkien seemed like he was more insufferable to people he disagreed with, and as a Lutheran, I respect that. Well, Chesterton's like that too. Man, that is a genuinely tough question. I kind of want to lean towards Tolkien because I do love Lord of the Rings. and because I do like his reputation. I remember being told by someone, I don't know if this is even true, but I've been told that Tolkien, when they switched to the Novus Ordo, he would like loudly, obnoxiously say the responsive words in Latin still, just to be that guy. And I kind of respect that type of intransigence.
That's
like,
awesome.
Yeah,
like
me too, man.
My fellow meme page admin made a Lutheran version of that where they sing in German like loudly when everyone else is singing in English. That's awesome. Yeah, I love Tolkien. I've got a lot of stuff around the room from him. All right, last one.
I'll say this for Lewis. I really want to read Space Trilogy at some point. I saw a meme or something what said it was something like the gist of the meme was that like the only thing worse than politicians are scientists. I'm like, oh,
yeah. People have been talking about that. I read them in, I want to say, high school or maybe college, and I know that I would appreciate them way more now, like as a fully functioning adult.
Sure.
But they are very apparently that the final one in the trilogy called That Hideous Strength kind of it's almost like a little like 1984. Like there's a lot of stuff that's on the nose that Lewis had his finger.
Okay, that's a very Dune kind of name for a book.
So I
immediately like it.
It's a interesting mix between science, how Lewis saw it, as well as some fantasy elements and stuff like that as well, and literal space travel. It reminded me a bit of like John Carter of Mars in some ways.
Okay.
Maybe just in kind of the planet hopping detail, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Last one. If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, and you can't say Jesus, but if you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, who would it be?
That's a tough question to answer on the spot. There's a couple people that come to mind. There's an ancestor of mine who's actually a martyr named Rene Goupil. He was among the first martyrs in North America. He was a lay Jesuit missionary back when
were they ever?
He would be. Yeah. Well, my knee-jerk reaction would be him because it'd be cool to meet a martyr, especially if I'm related to him in some way. If it was a more secular option, my favorite hockey player ever is Andre Palat. I was heartbroken when we let him go to the Devils this summer. I'm gonna be a nerd and a dweeb who's about to, be engaged before too long and say my girlfriend. Although any husband's like, screw this guy.
Hey, well, I mean,
what a dweeb. Yeah, those are my three people, I guess, if I have to be put on the spot. I think my ancestor, Rene Goupil, would be a really cool one just because, I've read accounts of his martyrdom, and it's, I pray I would ever have that kind of strength to endure the way he and the others, including some of the native converts, the Iroquois that they were proselytizing. I could only pray for that kind of faith.
That is really cool. That's probably the coolest answer yet. Hockey players are one thing, but like you have a martyr in your family tree, and that's just real. Yeah, thanks, man. I really enjoyed this. I think that everyone watching is going to enjoy it too. So thanks for coming on. Cool, and thank you for joining us, everyone. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and let us know in the comments below who your favorite hockey player is. Until next time, Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. We'll see y'all later.